I was recently asked how our country got so divided and if there was any hope. It's real simple, actually. See, the demographics of the Republican base have been steadily shrinking for the past 35 to 40 years. And boy, do we know it. Now, in order to maintain any semblance of modern political relevancy and avoid going the way of the Whigs, we had two choices. Embrace a number of growing minority and immigrant groups with similar views regarding commitments to faith, limited government, and promoting a healthy business environment. Or we could choose to double down on an aging base of native-born Caucasian conservatives. Now, in order for the first strategy to work, we would have to open our hearts and minds to a number of cultures with which we are neither familiar nor all that comfortable. Spicy food makes us gassy. Now, option number 2, on the other hand, means we don't have to change a thing. But we do have to work harder and harder every election to make sure every American-born white Christian conservative turns out to the polls. How do we do that? We scare them. Now, what happens when you scare the same 62 million people every 2 years for 40 years? For starters, you got to get more creative about what to be afraid of. Find an emotionally charged issue, rub some gasoline on it, and drop a match. Now, we got so scared that even dyed-in-the-wool conservatives started to sound like bedwetting Democrats. And this ended up distilling the base to such an extreme concentration that they began to demand further and further extreme candidates. The words moderation and compromise weren't just weak, they were treasonous. Enter the Tea Party, running a cold and calculated ground game on the local and state levels, while the DNC kicked back a little because they had taken so many factors for granted, like fact-based science, truth, and reality. The electorate on the left has had a growing pool of immigrants and young people with a holistic worldview and considerably more diverse set of life experiences. They don't recognize much for themselves in the GOP. They continue to grow and vote and legislate, and before we knew it, that nice familiar America from 40 years ago didn't exist anymore. What with the internet and globalization and sexual and gender fluidity. So we kept doubling down on older, whiter America. But seriously, that America doesn't exist anymore. Now that old white Republicans are literally outnumbered, what do? Voter suppression. We rewrite voting districts to favor conservative candidates and make it more difficult to vote. How? Eliminate early or mail-in voting for folks who have a hard time getting to the polls. And for the voters who somehow manage to get there, make sure that there are less polling locations statewide and guarantee longer lines. If, miraculously, a handful of left-leaning voters have made it far enough to ask for an actual ballot, hit them with some voter ID laws. Tell them they have to bring their own pencils. Turn the lights off. Line up a handful of rednecks out front enjoying their Second Amendment rights. Whatever it takes. What I'm trying to say is, the easier you make it to vote, the more people turn out. The more Americans vote, the more progressive this country will continue to become. If the new right, who used to be the far right, and corporate interests, which used to be business interests, but now have the same rights and privileges previously awarded to private citizens, didn't work so hard to stem the natural demographic tide overwhelming the modern Republican Party, then we'd actually be able to reinstate a progressive tax system and reverse the collapse of the middle class. And dare I say, return to the level of prosperity we all enjoyed around 35, 40 years ago. I'm Paul Ryan. Thanks for asking.